welcome you all to the launch of SFU's Community Summit, and tonight in particular, Research in the City. As we always like to do, I want to begin by acknowledging and appreciating the fact that we're gathering here in the traditional, unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Musqueam, and the Squamish. We're so glad to be here. Now, one of the things about our campus, or rather about our university that we're very proud of, is our quote-unquote engagement. And at this campus, we're very proud of the way we connect with communities internally and externally, both with students, with their academic colleagues, and with many different aspects of the community. But one of the best kept secrets of this campus is the amount of research and the contribution the research in this city makes to the lives of people in the city and around the world. For example, here in Vancouver, there's new programs we have going on here. In fact, the research posters outside. A gerontology study that's improving the lives of seniors and helping the provision of better services for them. We're also doing research on this campus that is contributing positively to Indigenous communities throughout the province and across the country. And we're also doing research in a whole range of areas in technology and startups, and we're helping lots of young startup companies bring their products and services to market. And so far, all of that has flown under the radar. And tonight is the beginning not only of SFU's Public Square Community Summit, but it's also the beginning of an ongoing process of sharing this secret with you and showcasing the research that goes on in our campus and the other campuses of the university, all of which we're very proud of, and many of the people involved are in this room. So thank you so much for participating. So tonight, we've had the posters outside, conventional research posters that were so good to look at. And now we're moving into storytelling about the research. And to moderate tonight and to welcome you on behalf of the university, please join me in welcoming our Vice President of Research for the university, Dr. Joy Johnson.
Thanks very much, Laurie. This is a vice president's research dream come true. A Friday night, and look how many people are out to talk about research. How often does that happen? So I really want to begin by thanking the organizers of this great event. This is a fabulous evening focused on researching the city, and it's, I think, really a particular source of pride for me because it's the launch for SFU's Public Square 2015 Community Summit. And it's wonderful that we're beginning by talking about research. This year, the summit's aimed at exploring the power of city building. And so we've got a lot of events planned over the coming week. And summit participants are going to have an opportunity to reflect on the role of creativity, arts, culture, and science in building and sustaining our cities and our neighborhoods. By profiling the increasing pressure facing municipalities, the surging urbanization, and considering what attracts and holds people to our urban settings, this summit is going to remind all of us about the power we hold to shape our own urban environment. Nowhere is this power more palpable than at universities like Simon Fraser University. That's why it makes sense to kick off this important week of events with this unique opportunity to highlight the massive impact that SFU research is having on our community and on our cities. As you may be aware, just from the advertising outside, SFU has turned 50 recently. And we have an incredibly impressive and diverse research community. Someone was asking me, I've been at SFU for a year now, and someone was asking me what I think about SFU and if I enjoy my job. And I can think of nothing more, no more privileged an opportunity than to learn about just the diversity and the fabulous research that takes place here. Through the university's engaged vision, as Laurie mentioned, we've been able to conduct our research achievements with the community in very real and tangible ways. We do so by engaging our communities to learn where the gaps are, where the issues and problems are, and then we marshal our resources to work with the communities and engage in our creative capacity of our students and of our faculty in order to mobilize new ideas to actually make a difference in our cities. So you can see this in action through the research in a variety of places. The Beatty School of Business through their Innovative Radius program, and I saw Sean here earlier today, and its work really in supporting a variety of innovative social enterprises. You can see this work in the SFU's Urban Studies Master's program, where graduate students have worked with extensive data sets to uncover the real impact of sharing economy innovations like Airbnb, and we saw a great poster outside today on that topic. You can see it through the unique partnerships that we've forged with institutions like St. Paul's Hospital to engage First Nations communities throughout the region. And I'm sure you saw it in the amazing poster presentations that were in the concourse this evening. And they were more than poster. They were video and really just totally engaging presentations. And I really want to thank all of you presenters for sharing your work with us. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg of research that's happening here at Simon Fraser University, Vancouver campus, and that's focused on city building. It really has been an enjoyable night thus far, and we're looking forward to this next chapter. It's for this reason that I can think of no better reason to kick off this year's SFU Public Square Community Summit than through an evening of showcasing and storytelling in celebration of how SFU's research is impacting and being impacted by the cities and communities throughout the Lower Mainland. So this evening we're going to have a series of stories, and the way the evening is going to work is that all of our storytellers are sitting in the front row, and we're going to invite each one of them to come and share a story for no more than 5 minutes. Their bios are available in the booklets that you have that were distributed earlier, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time telling you about their backgrounds, etc. You can read about that. But what we're going to do is just introduce who they are and have them come up, share, have some fun with us, I hope, share their insights with us, and then we'll move on to the next. So we're going to have a series of presentations, and then hopefully if there's time toward the end, we'll have a bit of chance for dialogue and question and answer. Because we didn't know how to order these fabulous stories, we're doing it in alphabetical order, beginning with A. And so can you please join me in welcoming our very first speaker, who's going to kick off this evening, Stephanie Allen.
Hello. 3 days ago, Vancouver City Council voted to bring down the viaducts. Transportation, parks, condos, waterfront, these aspects have been reported, debated. But how the city's urban renewal policies were rooted in willful displacement of an urban black neighborhood known as Hogan's Alley has received little attention. Tonight I'll tell you the story through the words of others, quoting from first-person accounts documented in Opening Doors, Vancouver's East Side, and contrasting these to excerpts from the 1957 redevelopment study produced by the City of Vancouver. To conclude, I offer the opinion that I gave to City Council 9 days ago, that this is an opportunity for restorative justice in urban placemaking. Austin Phillips came to Vancouver from Athabasca Landing in Alberta. There was nothing but parties in Hogan's Alley. I used to go from one place to the other playing guitar. They never paid a salary. They had what you call a kitty, a little tin box. People wanted to tip you. They'd want to throw a buck, 10 cents. They'd throw it in the kitty. That was your money. That's what you made. Nora Hendricks was born in Knoxville, Tennessee in 1883. She came to Vancouver in 1911. One of her grandchildren was Jimi Hendrix. When I came here, there was no church. So let me see. It could be back in 1918, as far as I can think back, when we first taken that church over on Jackson Avenue. We got all together, commenced to working for it to get this church started. So all of the sisters and brothers, everyone, we commenced getting busy, having entertainments and bazaars, suppers and everything we could to raise money to buy this church. Getting dollars together them days was hard work. When you went to work, all you got was $1.50 for your day's work. Dorothy Neely was born in Winnipeg in 1917 of an Aboriginal mother and Black father. She moved to Vancouver in 1944. When I came here, this district was Negroes. From Main Street to Campbell Avenue, like you see the Chinese here now, whole apartment blocks were full of blacks. Because if they went someplace to rent a house, they wouldn't refuse them and say, "We don't want you here because you're black." They'd just mention some exorbitant price for the rent, you see. In the United States, the Americans are so blatant about the racial prejudice, you can fight it, but they call you nigger, and they segregate you out loud and clear. But the racism here in Canada, it's subtle and so elusive, you can't really pin it down. When we heard about the City Council's plan for the neighborhood, we were horrified. We just screamed. The whole neighborhood got involved because we were satisfied with our neighborhood. What was wrong with living here? I've lived here for 33 years. I wouldn't want to live anyplace else. But somebody comes over from Dunbar District, looking down their nose at this end of town. From the 1907 Vancouver redevelopment study, the Negro population, while numerically small, is probably a large proportion of the total Negro population in Vancouver. Their choice of this area is partly its proximity to the railroads, where many of them are employed, partly its cheapness, and partly the fact that it is traditionally the home of many non-white groups. The disruption of accustomed social arrangements, which is the inevitable concomitant of relocation, is bound to create special problems for these minority groups. It is therefore important that the relocation program should be flexible enough to allow members of the same ethnic group to remain together, while at the same time discouraging the formation of ethnic enclaves. Voices of residents juxtaposed against city planning machine, legitimized frameworks of displacement and erasure that denied Black citizens their right to the city. My research has led me to get involved in urging the city to pursue restorative justice through placemaking, space for Black communities to once again have a visible role in the greater Vancouver mosaic as these viaducts come down. Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Kiri Bird, engaging with SFU, a user-centered perspective. Come on down, Kiri.
So this story tonight is a story of three perspectives. We've got the individual perspective. Here, a man on the screen, his name's Emmett. He's 48. He lives in the downtown east side, but he's not from there. He came from a community up north. He moved to the city for more economic opportunity when the mill in his town closed and all the jobs dried up. For reasons that I can't go into in a 5-minute presentation, Emmett has not worked in the formal economy for 5 years. He is collecting income assistance, or a welfare check, $610 a month. After he pays out his rent at a single occupancy room hotel, that leaves him, just over $100 a month to survive on. And anyone in this room knows that's a difficult task in Vancouver. So Emmett is anything but lazy. He is incredibly entrepreneurial. He is scouring the back alleys and collecting bottles and depositing those for refund. And then he's also finding additional items of value, like these speakers, and kind of refurbishing them and selling them on the street. But the thing about making a little bit of extra cash on the street when you're on income assistance is there's something called clawback. So if you earn more than $200 of extra income and you declare it, the government will actually claw back that income for you on future income assistance checks. That makes financial planning, saving, or re-entering the labor market incredibly difficult for people like Emmett. How does this issue of clawback affect organizations? Here you have a photo of the downtown East Side Street Market. I actually think this is the 280th downtown East Side Street Market on a Sunday. It happens here at Pigeon Park, just around the corner on Carroll Street. The Street Market Society is providing safe spaces for vending in Vancouver. They have 845 registered people who are vendors engaging in what's called survival vending, like Emmett. It's amazing. It's estimated that these vendors make an aggregate of up to $500,000 a year, and that's going directly into the pockets of Vancouver's most vulnerable residents. It's really amazing what they do. But the street market doesn't run itself. It's run by an army of volunteers that are working in positions, everything from street cleaner to security guard to the responsible person in charge. And these positions are all paid through volunteer stipends. The stipends are run between about $3 and $10 an hour. If you know about a lot of organizations in the downtown east side, there are a lot of organizations who are using these volunteer stipends to pay people to develop skills. They are under minimum wage, in part because the organizations have an onus and feel a responsibility to make sure that individuals aren't affected by clawback. So that creates, as you might imagine, some really complicated staffing situations and ethical responsibilities and stress for people actually running employment-focused social enterprise. And what about our institutions? We have organized institutions like Work BC, which is provincially legislated to deal with the employment training and job and skill training. But unfortunately, these activities we've just described all take place in the informal economy, not the formal economy, and it's not in the government's interest to have people employed in the informal economy, of course. So if Emmett wants to get security training through Work BC to be able to be a security guard at the street market, he actually can't because that's not what their resources are meant for. So this is just one of many, many examples of how our systems are not serving individuals in the community and organizations that are also grappling with those challenges. And why am I telling you this story? Well, because I think at the core, at the intersection of these three perspectives, really lies an opportunity to innovate. And it's obvious that practice change and policy change and all sorts of new solutions will need to be built in order to address what lies ahead of us. As researchers, I believe it's our role and responsibility to ask how can we add value to this conversation and how can we creatively collaborate to address these complex problems. The Local Economic Development Lab is an initiative of EcoTrust Canada and Radius here at Simon Fraser University. And we are inverting the traditional research lab and putting communities' needs, priorities, and research questions at the heart of the research agenda. We have secured 30 graduate student internships to support this research over the next 3 years, and we're just getting started. So this is a bit of a call to action and call out for researchers. Please do get in touch with us. We do have student funding as well. We're looking for senior researchers to collaborate with on publications. So visit us at our website, www.ledlab.ca, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
That was terrific, and I did notice that there was not a single note used in that presentation, which is really, truly amazing to me. So our next presenters are Teresa Chang and Brittany Barker, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say on your topic, Researching HIV/AIDS, a Story of Hope and Health in Vancouver.
Chang, and this is Brittany, and we are here from the British Columbia Centre for Excellence in HIV and AIDS, which is located in St. Paul's Hospital. The centre is dedicated to developing, monitoring, and disseminating comprehensive research and treatment programs for HIV and related diseases. Specifically, we're involved with the Urban Health Research Initiative, which is a program based at the centre and operates a network of research studies. I'm going to start with a brief history, very brief history. In the 80s and 90s, Vancouver's downtown east side had the most explosive epidemic of HIV ever observed outside of sub-Saharan Africa. And this was driven mostly by injection drug use. And the rates of fatal overdose in the neighborhood were also alarming. In response to this, Drs. Thomas Kerr and Evan Wood from the center started the Vancouver Injection Drug Users Study, also known as VIDUS, in 1996. As VIDAS continued, it became clear that the research was missing an important population of people who used drugs and were at risk for a variety of health-related harms: youth. Back in 2005, concerns were also starting to rise about the use of crystal methamphetamine among youth in particular. And this was a big gap in knowledge that we and other researchers didn't know much about. So in an effort to be responsive to our community and study funders, we started the At-Risk Youth Study, also known as ARISE, which is a prospective open cohort study. That was 10 years ago, and today it follows approximately 700 youth who are street involved and reside in and around downtown Vancouver. Things change, however, and the latest drug problem is the non-medical use of prescription opioids. And as you may know, Vancouver, British Columbia, and other jurisdictions are struggling with non-medical prescription opioid use, and this is resulting in many fatal overdoses. And in Vancouver, this has been attributed in part to fake prescription opioids that are laced with fentanyl, which is a very powerful opioid. Dr. Cora DeBeck, who's in the audience somewhere, is now the principal investigator of ARISE and is a faculty member in the School of Public Policy here at SFU. She recently received a grant to develop a nested cohort within the ARISE study of youth who use prescription opioids for non-medical purposes or in ways that aren't prescribed. In our preliminary research, we found that the availability of prescription opioids among youth in our cohort and our network of studies has increased since 2006, and prescription opioids can be obtained within about 10 minutes by most of our cohort participants. We also found, however, that the incidence of hepatitis C in the ARISE cohort is not associated with non-medical prescription opioid use, which is a good thing, but we obviously need to keep monitoring that and see if it changes. I'm going to pass it along to Brittany now, who will talk more about her research and the future of ARISE.
Great, thanks, Tessa. So building on what Tessa spoke about the original objectives of ARISE, motivated by the public health needs of street-involved youth in the city, but also the explosive methamphetamine use, we began to expand our focus to other issues as they emerged. For example, the impacts of being exposed to the foster care system or aging out of child welfare became a key issue for a number of cities' nonprofits, particularly the Vancouver Foundation. So we investigated the prevalence among ARISE participants and found that nearly 50% of our youth in our study had been in the child welfare system at some point in their childhood, meaning street-involved youth in our setting were 160 times more likely than the general population of youth in Canada to have been in care. Additionally, Aboriginal youth were much more likely to have been in care, which is consistent with both national and international statistics. We also investigated recent reports of incarceration and found that Aboriginal youth were 40% more likely to have been incarcerated than their non-Aboriginal street-involved peers, even when accounting for risk factors associated with incarceration. This study has made several local and national media stories. ARISE also has a community advisory board, or the CAB, made up of a variety of stakeholders, including service providers, health authority officials, the BC CDC, the Pivot Legal Society, and the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users. The CAB ensures that our activities are responsive to the needs of the city, while also being congruous with research gaps identified in the scientific literature. So if the CAB or any one of our community partners identify a local need that requires scientific investigation, we can look into it and then present our findings through a range of knowledge translation and information sharing activities that are housed at the center. As it is ARISE's 10th anniversary, we have applied for a grant to take 10 years of our studies and synthesize them into a plain language report. This will include what we've learned about how street-involved youth are accessing housing, harm reduction, health and social services, and addiction treatment, and how these interventions affect their drug use patterns and behaviors. We're aiming to have this event to celebrate the launch of the report early next year, and along with an exhibition of a multimedia project that one of our ethnographers has been conducting with a small group of ARISE youth. We will then disseminate this report through our established knowledge translation program in the hopes of informing future policy and improving the situation for street-involved youth in Vancouver. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was terrific. I've got two microphones now because this microphone up here is sizzling, so we're going to now have the speakers use this microphone. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Mark Friesen, who's going to talk about democracy in the city, civic groups, and decision making. Here you go, Mark.
This is great. I've learned like 1,000 things in 10 minutes. So fast. Okay, so for my research, I had a look at public participation in decision-making, okay? So how we get the public involved and included in the decision-making that takes place for city building or building our cities. The images I've got up here, this is of a public hearing. So city council, a town hall, or a public hearing. Not a local one. This is in the United States somewhere, okay? So you're not going to see yourselves up here. Now, we've all got the sense that a public hearing is not really the best way to go about getting the public involved in decision-making. Nobody leaves a public hearing feeling like, gosh, that was a great use of my time. What a fulfilling experience. I was contributing to my city. That was amazing. I've not come across people that have participated in a public hearing that have felt that. What we don't know, though, is we don't know what's the alternative. What's a better way to get the public included and involved in decision-making? So for my research, I had a comprehensive look at one of the most comprehensive processes to get the public involved in city building or decision-making ever undertaken in Vancouver. So the process that Metro Vancouver undertook to create the regional growth strategy. Okay, so Metro Vancouver, regional entity consisting of 21 municipalities, the Tsawwassen First Nation, the electoral area where UBC is located, and they set out to create a regional land use plan for the social, economic, and environmental future of the region. I just want to let that land for a second. So they basically said, we're going to set goals for everything. They didn't leave anything out, like social, economic, environment, that's everything. So they undertook a really comprehensive process, 2006 to 2010, and they pulled all the stops. They held public hearings. They did online consultations. They solicited written submissions from members of the public, civic groups. You name the tactic. I mean, they did it over a 4-year process. So I spoke with the civic groups who participated in the process, civic planners from municipalities that participated in the process, even some politicians. And here's what I found out. Civic groups and members of the public, when it comes to making decisions around our cities, have two things. They've got amazing innovative ideas for what the future they want and how we can achieve that future. And here's the critical thing that was so exciting to me. Civic groups have resources and capacity to put into city building. They want to contribute. They don't want government to just do it all. They want to actually contribute. But to do that, they want to be involved in co-creating what those goals are, what the vision of the future, what the city is going to look like. The process for the Metro Vancouver Regional Growth Strategy didn't give an opportunity for that. They started with a vision. They started with goals. They got feedback on those goals, but they didn't get people involved in co-creating what that future was. So when you talk to civic groups now, even the ones who participated in the process, they can barely remember the strategy exists. They can't remember the goal, and these are the ones who participated in it. Because they were involved, they wanted to participate in co-creating those goals, all right? The second thing that I found out was city planners who participated in the process got an opportunity to interact with one another consistently over time. And in doing so, they challenged each other. They disagreed with one another. They learned different things. They, miracle of all miracles, changed their minds. They got different perspectives. They adopted different changes. No one leaves a public hearing having changed their mind. You walk out with the same opinion that you walked in with. City planners, as part of the process, learned something from one another. Unfortunately, civic groups, for the process, over that 4-year period, they did not get a chance to interact with one another. They were solicited for feedback independently of one another. The BC Business Council never interacted with the David Suzuki Foundation. And those are just two. There was like 60 civic groups that participated in the process. They didn't get a chance to hear from or learn from one another, all right? So the learning or the message I'm hoping that resonated and is going to resonate in the future when we do public consultation or looking to include members of the public or civic groups in decision-making are two things. People have to be involved in creating what that vision is, what the goals are for our city in the first place. And they have to be, secondly, they have to be involved in, given an opportunity to learn from one another, to interact from one another, not to solicit feedback independently of one another in a public forum like this. They have to get a chance to interact with one another on a consistent basis. If we can do those two things, I think we can come up with amazing goals and visions for our cities and this region, and also mobilize all the resources of civil society that right now are sitting a little bit idle when it comes to the vision, for instance, of the regional growth strategy. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you very much. And for those of you who would like to engage with one another, you can always tweet your comments, hashtag #wethecity, and start a conversation in the Twitter sphere. So welcome to that. So our next speaker is Tracy Friesen, Our City, Your Voice. Roundhouse 98.3 Vancouver, radio as a force for good, question mark.
Question mark. Hi. I'm the Director of Programming with Roundhouse Radio. I am not a researcher with SFU, although I have had many... in time, I have studied liberal studies upstairs here, and I've studied business up the road, and I worked for years across the atrium at Woodward's when I was heading up the National Film Board's studio as executive producer of documentary film. So I have a deep love of SFU and a love for this neighborhood. And I'm pleased to be a part of a new radio station that went on the air 2 weeks ago, 98.3 FM. I've got a couple of my colleagues here, including the founder, Don Schaefer. Some of you may remember him as one of the founders of the Fox. Schaefer in the Box might ring a bell for the older ones in the group. He and 3 other BC families had an idea several years ago about the possibility of radio to connect people, and radio at a deep local level for doing good in this world. Around the same time, the Vancouver Foundation released a report about the degree of isolation and loneliness and disconnectedness that people in the city of Vancouver felt. I know that it was actually one of the reports that spawned the first one of these conferences, in fact, that the Public Square put on here at SFU. And so taking that research and their own intuition and thinking about the concerns that the people of the city of Vancouver had, which is we might be a beautiful city, but people are not feeling as close to each other as we might like. There was a real sense about shifting what the thought of the radio station might be to become something that could address some of the issues that were identified in the report. That people, in fact, wanted to connect more with each other. They wanted to volunteer. They wanted to know their neighbors, but on some levels weren't sure how to go about doing that. The team behind the radio station commissioned original research by Joint Communications, and I think the Vancouver Foundation group interviewed, almost 4,000 people. Joint Communications, this research, extensive interviews were done with over 600 people to talk about some of the findings of the earlier report and whether and how people in the city of Vancouver felt about their abilities and capacities to connect to each other. And so out of this, a format was born about how conversation, respectful conversation on the radio between neighbors at a hyper-local, Vancouver-centric level could help us learn more about each other. That was presented to the CRTC in early 2014, and the format being mostly dialogue, mostly talk, 80% conversation, 20% music, and a real intention around the city of Vancouver, the neighborhoods of Vancouver, and us all connecting with each other in that way. The research revealed a kind of a gap in the marketplace in terms of who might be underserved, and they kind of came up with me in a way, I think. Mid-40s, well, late 40s now, socially minded, active locals, cultural explorers, people who want to find ways to learn about one another. And with that research and that gap identified, Roundhouse Radio won its license for an FM channel middle of last year. I joined the team actually a year ago tomorrow, I think it is. So I'm looking for like a little anniversary cake back there, Don. And we began the process of team building and studio building. We've got a studio set up in Railtown, Alexander, and Heatley. That's accessible and open to the public. It's ground level, people can see in. And we've begun a lineup of programming that allows for, I think, a very diverse range of interests in the hosts. And I know as we went through over 300 interviews to pull this team of 30 plus people together, the word that was always in my mind was curious. We wanted to have people on the radio station who were curious about each other, because I feel with that degree of wonder and intelligent, respectful conversation, we can understand each other better. Of course, there's the regular day parts, but everything else that matters to Vancouverites, like their health, their heart, their homes, real estate, music. We've got a live show that comes out of Gastown, out of Gilton Company to Bar in Gastown, so that we can also really draw attention to local and live music. So for me, this was a big step. I came out of documentary film, and why would I join a radio station? It's because the values were aligned with mine, and I feel a great sense of the power of social media to affect change. And in the case of Roundhouse, the canvas was different. It's radio, it's audio, it's talking, it's local, but it still has the same degree of capacity to do good in this world. So I hope that you'll join us. It wouldn't seem like a proper radio thing if I didn't plug that we have a contest right now, actually, for nominating the Vancouverite that you feel does the most good in Vancouver, and that person will win a $5,000 staycation in the city of Vancouver. So I encourage you to go to roundhouseradio.com and tell us who you think really makes this city strong, because we all want a resilient and stronger city. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Tracy. Thank you very much. That was terrific. I'm going to definitely check out the radio station. Our next presenter is Am Johal. Am is going to present on community engagement and partnership building research in progress.
Thank you very much, Joy. It's great to be here. I'm actually going to talk about kind of relationship to research that sort of comes from a critical point of view, because we've been approached. I've been at SFU for almost 5 years now, and we've been approached probably about a dozen times to work with our office and community groups, and we've said no every time. And I want to talk about that because we're a university that, at its core, is about teaching and research. I'm going to get that out of there. What we have been trying to do, based out of the Woodwards building, which was a kind of very polarizing development in the city, there was, in the process of that development, a lot of different visions about how SFU should partner with the community. So from the very beginning in talking with people, it's been a relationship building exercise. It's been around people's values, relationship building, and trying to see what is it that the university can offer that the community is looking for that sometimes doesn't begin with a relationship to research. So oftentimes that comes with an access to space, an access to telling stories of the neighborhood from a community perspective. It's about valuing community knowledge alongside academic knowledge. And so part of the argument we're trying to make through our work, which largely happens through public programming and partnerships and programming that's directly for residents in the neighborhood, is that if we can actually engage in the public sphere where we value the academic knowledge that exists with grad students and other people with people in the neighborhood, and we can actually record those conversations, that in fact they become documents that researchers can look to. So when we're talking about something like the supervised injection site, there are many academic papers that are available, but from a community perspective, when people sit on panels and then those videos are available, we send them to the library. We have an archive of over 150 that are now able to be accessed at the university. Also, by partnering with people over a long period of time, our relationships now go back 5 years. So when we have students who want to do internships or placements with groups, that we have a high level of trust that's already there. So we're actually now in a position of looking at the relationship to teaching and the relationship to research in a way that will actually have far more impact and can be a lot deeper. This group, in nonprofit language, there's a term they often called creative placemaking, and we actually inverted that to creative place breaking because we felt placemaking was a little bit too affirmative, because in some senses, when you're doing community engagement inside of a university, there's rules and policies that are really meant that make sense inside of a university. From a community perspective, they can actually be the exact opposite. You know, one of the stories I always tell is for the first year we were there at Woodward's, the front door on the Hastings side was closed to the public. So we had to go out and talk to the faculty and students and figure out, and now that door is actually finally open and available for the public to use on that side. This group that we work with is Karen Jameson Dance. So she's already had a practice based out of the Carnegie Center since the late 90s. So, 10, 15 years of relationships already there. So by partnering with groups that have those relationships, we can actually already have a high level of trust with the groups of people that she's working with. We're able to make space available inside the building. So they usually come in at 3 o'clock to do their dance workshops. In the evening, we switch over and can do public talks. So now people have been coming in for a long time. They, in fact, are going to be doing a performance on Sunday as part of the Heart of the City Festival. We've been doing a project called Super Cool Tuesdays. This is actually usually happens at the Interurban Gallery a couple blocks east of SFU, which we rent a couple days of the week. It's a local artist talking about stories about their practice. And this one, they've actually walked over here to the Harbor Center and Instant Coffee and is presenting. Andrea Creamer is a student who now works with me full time. We actually have also a couple of co-op students at work as well. So we've found from a student perspective to have that interaction between local residents and students directly outside of a research framework can be very motivating for them as well. Project Limelight is a local nonprofit arts group based out of Strathcona Community Center. So we make the Faye Milton Wong Theatre available for them for a couple of shows. They've been here for the past 3 years, but because we also have the School for Contemporary Arts, we now have students doing the tech work, the directing, all of those other pieces that are a great value to our students. And so they're actually setting up bursaries for these students, so in the future they can actually be students at the School for Contemporary Arts at SFU. Whoops, wrong way. And one more, we've been doing Coast Salish drumming workshops with Russell Wallace as well. The Aboriginal community in the downtown east side is 10% of the population. In Metro Vancouver, it's 2%. And as we've seen with our consultations as well, this is an area we want to continue to expand the programming on because of our location. That's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. More slides to enjoy. Fabulous. Excellent. There's Duncan. Thank you. That was terrific. Our next speaker is Duncan Lowe, and Duncan is presenting on the topic of do creative city policies support the professional arts? Duncan.
I wish I could do it without notes, but I'm afraid I can't. This one? Okay. My research is focused on federal arts policy, concentrating on two particular aspects: continuous long-term policy and short-term time-restricted policy. The Marquee Tourism Events Programme is an example of short-term time-restricted policy, and this is the focus of this evening's presentation. The Marquee Tourism Programme was a 2-year, $100 million program with clear goals, targeted investment in Canada's festivals and events to increase the numbers of domestic and international tourists. The 2-year time-restricted nature of the program provided a unique research opportunity to analyze the federal government's wider arts policy and to explore the complex relationship between the professional arts, festivals, cultural tourism, and operational government funding in the process of city building. Of particular interest was the fact that the 107 festivals and events spread across the country that received funding were legally required to commission and submit an economic impact study detailing the outcomes of their funding, according to strict criteria laid down by the federal government. It took me a Freedom of Information request. I lodged a Freedom of Information request, and it took me nearly 2 years to access the marquee tourism data. And finally, after nearly 2 years, I received over 5,000 pages of marquee tourism application forms, ministerial briefing notes, departmental briefing notes, and all the economic impact studies of the festivals that receive funding across the country. There are several major influences currently at play on 21st century arts policy. The creative city movement, cultural tourism, festivalization, and Richard Florida's creative class theory, that the creative classes are attracted to cities that have invested in amenities and city facades, including festivals, public art, bike paths, cultural precincts, and examples of star architecture. I could speak for a long time on that, but I won't. The City of Toronto's 2003 culture plan for a creative city was heavily influenced by Richard Florida's linking of creativity and economic competitiveness. The arts, and therefore, and when I say the arts, the professional arts, and therefore urban arts festivals, are increasingly being used as instruments of economic development. One example, and I've picked an example from Toronto, not from the many festivals that receive funding in Vancouver. One example being Luminato Festival in Toronto, that received nearly $4 million in marquee tourism funds. A recent study of festivals demonstrated that politicians and municipal cultural planners responded more positively to festivals displaying economic and tourism indicators than those displaying artistic and community-based indicators. This is particularly interesting in the case of Luminato, as the idea for the festival came from 2 members of Toronto's business community, not from the arts community itself, which was described in the 2003 culture plan as, I quote, asset-rich, cash-poor. My research has concentrated on visualizing funding and other data patterns from marquee tourism recipients. Here is one visualization of the Luminato Festival. What we see here is a picture of an unsustainable arts operation where expenditure is continuously outstripping revenue. Considering that Luminato had its first outing in 2007, it is extraordinary to discover that in its first 2 years of operation, the festival received a total of nearly $25 million in government funding. In terms of arts policy, this places Luminato in the mega event category. This does not represent the usual public funding model employed for arts festivals, but more the classical commercial business startup, with an initial investment based upon expected returns that, in this case, have not to date materialized. It is important to note that through this initial investment emanated directly from the provincial government and not through arm's length funding channels traditionally employed to distribute public funds. When we break Luminato's funding down further into federal, provincial, and municipal funding, a different funding visualization starts to appear. One could assume that arts funding institutions at government levels would be working in partnership, that when one government's funding increased, working in partnership, funding in unison. However, I started to see that as I went through the marquee tourism data, that government funding was acting as a counterbalance. When one government's funding increased, another decreased, and vice versa. This is, and of itself, has far-reaching implications for the current public arts funding model in Canada today. And finally, my last slide. Industry Canada conducted an evaluation of the marquee program, which reported that, using the data obtained through marquee tourism, the government were unable to determine the extent of any changes in tourism numbers. Also, it said that the projected costs of running the program, which were set at $4 million, rose to nearly $6 million due to overtime costs. My research has taken me on a journey through the maze of Freedom of Information requests, through the corridors of Library and Archives Canada in Ottawa, through the Canada Council Archives and Library in Ottawa. And the most disturbing thing I've found in terms of the storytelling, the most disturbing thing I've found is the reaction one receives when one asks questions about the public funding of arts, professional arts. There is an immediate suspicion where people look at you and go, why? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Duncan. I did hear a gasp in the room when you mentioned $25 million, I must say. Our next presenter is Tara Mahoney. And Tara, welcome. I don't seem to have your title with me for some reason, so we're going to advance the slide. Oh, that's why, because I've got two people, Tara Mahoney and Jasmine Scarf, and they're going to present on Creative Public's Art Making Inspired by the Federal Election. Actually, a nice segue from the last talk in some ways, so thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Oh, let's get this. Hi, everybody. So we're just going to talk about a project that we did as part of the Art for Social Change research project, which is a 4-year national research project into community arts across Canada. So this project was kind of conceived as both a research project and an engagement project and a field study into an experimental way to engage with the federal election using art. So that's our check-in desk. So basically what the project entailed was we partnered with the Tin Can Studio, which is a local mobile art studio, and we went to 4 different locations across the city and invited people to come in and make collages around elections issues. If you saw the vote letters out front, those collages on there were the collages people made when they came in. And I'll just...
So the project took place from September 10th to October 2nd, and as Tara mentioned, there was 4 separate sessions. The first session was held in SFU Surrey. The second session was SFU's Burnaby campus, and the third and fourth sessions were at Victory Square at Hastings and Cambie. So one of the interesting challenges with the different locations was just the overall design of space. So this was at SFU in Burnaby, and you can see the Tin Can Studio there. So there was a collage station set up inside of the Tin Can. We have the check-in station over here, and there's also a collage station set up here. So we tried to create some sort of flow through the space that people could move through it, and that they could also choose sort of where and how they wanted to engage with the project. We offered free coffee and snacks to lure people in, and it was very effective.
And just a breakdown of, we haven't had a chance to analyze a lot of the visual data that we got because the election just happened last week, but just to give you an idea of the types of people that, so this was, so 34% of people who participated hadn't voted in the election. We were hitting our target audience with the 19 to 34-year-old demographic, and slightly more men participated than women. And so one thing that we discovered around the engagement, was creating multiple opportunities for people to engage with the space. So this is Vanessa Richards, who's a local choir practitioner, and she came and invited people to sing choir around using political songs as they were collaging. This guy just joined in and started playing guitar. There's a photo booth behind her. There's the tin can that you can't see. There's coffee. So one of the things that we discovered, which wasn't part of the formal research, was when you're taking over public space, giving people multiple opportunities to engage to the degree with which they determine. So we can go in there with our research questions and our methods and all of that, but ultimately when you're doing something like this, people are gonna engage however they want, and you kind of have to be ready for that and flexible. Do you want to speak to that one?
Sure. Yeah, I think, so here we have the vote letters and someone's writing something there, and as Tara was saying, there were many people who participated in the project without making a collage, and some of the sort of deeper stories and experiences I had weren't documented. So I think it's just interesting in terms of, as a participant or as a researcher, you wish you could capture everything, but it's not possible. And so the idea of an open space where, all are welcome into it, whether it's to grab a coffee or to have a conversation or to sit down and make a collage, there just seemed to be a lot of richness from all those aspects.
And so here's a photo of a participant. And these are some of the collages people made. And then it all culminated in the vote letters that were on display in the SFU lobby leading up. And we found this also to be really important for not only the research, but also the engagement, where people could display what they made in public and also see their creation amongst other people. It had an element of validation that we found interviewing people afterwards. And then, so this question here, to what extent do you agree or disagree with the following statement? So we've got, 70% of people said that it had increased their motivation to engage in the election. This is an important stat for me, just because providing a fun experience to engage in politics was one of the major goals of the project on the engagement side. And of all the people, fun and a way to feel engaged with politics were the two main outcomes that people reported. And this is just a word cloud of the written responses that were given. We got a lot of people saying that traditional politics feels very frustrating, and having a space where they could express themselves openly and come in and leave when they chose left them feeling sort of satisfied, and it had a cathartic effect on them. So that's reflected in some of these letters. And that's it. There's another part, but I'm not going to get into it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tara and Jasmine. And I must say, it was amazing to watch the engagement with the work that you're doing across the 3 campuses, and also to see so many of students really kind of thinking about voting and voting for the first time. So congratulations on that as well. Our next presenter is Eugene McCann, and Eugene's going to present on the topic, The City is Here and Elsewhere, Researching and Teaching Local Geographies of Ideas. I'm intrigued.
Thanks. I'm a professor, I had to have a long title, especially after the colon. It's all about after the colon. Thanks to the organisers. This is a very interesting event. Strangely familiar. In cities, we often feel that we've seen things before. Certain ideas, policies, best practices seem to be everywhere. And more strikingly, so do the landscapes they create. We might commonly think of urban policies as intensely local interventions, but clearly policy models travel and become embedded, received wisdoms across numerous places. Every city contains parts of elsewhere and policies from elsewhere. This is an urban geography of policy. Geographers study how places are connected and separated. We study how places are similar and different, and how these connections and separations make a difference. These interconnections and disconnections strongly influence how cities change. Urban change is written on the city, literally and figuratively. Policy making is about managing and facilitating that change. But we must think both globally and also locally if you like, if we are to fully understand the feeling of strange familiarity we often experience in cities. We must analyse the connective tissue and the various mobilisations of ideas that produce systems of interconnected cities. This connective tissue includes actors like policy consultants, politicians, and also activists and ordinary community members. It includes institutions from the United Nations to local chambers of commerce, and it involves comparative practices like benchmarking, ranking, modelling, and boosterism. These actors and practices mobilise ideas and policies and embed them in cities. Through my research, I've helped develop a new literature in urban studies focused on the concept of policy mobilities. This concept leads to specific questions. Who mobilises and who is mobilised in making policy? How are policies rendered mobile? What sites and spaces shape policy mobilisation, and how are they shaped by it? What are the politics of this local policy making, and why are certain particular policies promoted, resisted, and debated? I've tried to address some of these questions by studying harm reduction drug policy, not so much in the way that we've heard about so far, but to study it as a contentious political model and policy model which challenges the received wisdom of the dominant criminalisation approach to drug use. Harm reduction is a public health model that is most associated with innovations like needle exchanges, methadone treatment, and supervised injection facilities like Insight in the downtown east side. Harm reduction is also political in the sense that it advocates for policy change to improve the lives of people who use drugs, especially the poor and marginalised. And it is an urban policy in many ways. Legal facilities like Insight exist in over 60 cities in Europe, Canada, and Australia. Their presence changes not only the health of those who use them, but also the character of the urban built environments around them. For example, take Zurich in the 1990s. The transformation of so-called Needle Park by the opening of supervised consumption facilities highlights the relationship between harm reduction and the character of the urban built environment. Although this transformation here, it should be emphasised, does not mean that all injustices to people who use drugs have been solved. There's still a lot of work being done. Harm reduction then has its own global geography of ideas and policies. We can follow the travels of the model, tracing its influence from place to place, from Frankfurt to Vancouver, through Sydney, for example. And we can think that parts of here are elsewhere and parts of elsewhere are here. We can only tell a full story of our city if we look away from it as well as into it. We can only fully evaluate policies if we understand who mobilised them and why. But so what? Well, one valid answer is that new concepts help us understand a changing world. Another is that it's important to use our research to partner with community groups. But while it may be a cliche, I would also argue that teaching is an important, if sometimes undervalued, form of research dissemination, translation, and engagement. Teaching is activism. Teaching, whether in the classroom or on field trips, like this one to Insight, explains my research to a general audience, the students. I want students to think outside the box, even if their professor seems to be stuck in one. I want them to think critically because many of them will go on to be urban planners and urban professionals, or will go on to be urban activists and volunteers, and they will be urban geographers who engage the city. So my primary goal then is to help them be engaged, critical, active citizens. I want them to consume the news more critically and not necessarily buy into received wisdoms. Abstract concepts offer them the opportunity to step back and evaluate and contextualise the stories that they are told about what's best for cities. I hope my research helps my students ask the critical question, urban policy, how, from where, and for whom. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That was terrific. Our next presenter, a master's student in social psychology, Scott Neufeld, is going to present on the topic, Growing Vancouver's Aboriginal Focus School by Understanding Parents' Perceptions.
Thanks very much. This past June, I was in Ottawa for the historic release of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report. The TRC revealed, the truth revealed by the TRC is that Canada committed cultural genocide by forcing Aboriginal children to attend residential schools like this one on Vancouver Island. At these schools, children's dignity was violated in countless ways, and their cultures and identities were stolen from them. That's the truth. How we respond to this truth is where we can begin to see what reconciliation might look like. I want to share a story with you tonight that gives me some hope for reconciliation between people of Aboriginal heritage and people like myself, a settler living on unceded Coast Salish territory. This is Vancouver's 4-year-old Aboriginal focus school, and it's been the focus of my master's research for the past 2 years. The school is an initiative of the Vancouver School Board, and it's an example of one way that cities like Vancouver can move towards reconciliation by making space within their institutions for Aboriginal perspectives. The school's mission is to teach both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal students through an Aboriginal lens that honors the First Peoples of this territory and provides opportunities for students to engage with their own cultural heritage. The school is located on Victoria and Hastings, and it's in this neighborhood that this story begins. A little over 2 years ago, the Grandview Woodlands Area Council decided they wanted to learn more about the Aboriginal community in their neighborhood. They invited Vonnie Hutchinson, a Haida and Tsimshian woman, to come speak about the Aboriginal Focus School where she was the principal. My graduate supervisor, Michael Schmidt, was at that meeting, and he heard Vonnie wondering how the Aboriginal Focus School could grow. How could it increase its enrollment? Michael approached Vonnie and told her he thought maybe he could help her answer her question. He also said, I've got this great new master's student who I think could probably be interested in spending the next few years working on this, which is how I got involved. As we've gotten to know each other, we've also discovered that we're actually neighbors. This is where Michael lives, this is where I live, and this is where Vonnie lives. In fact, I can see Vonnie's front door from my own front door. Since fall 2013, we've been working together to better understand how parents in our neighborhood perceive the Aboriginal Focus School and what could be done to help this program better meet their needs. Michael and I combined our research skills in social psychology with Vonnie's expertise in Aboriginal education in order to conduct this research respectfully and effectively. We've grown to trust each other, and we've become friends. We listen to each other, we respect each other, and we don't make any decisions about the project that we don't all agree on. The process of building a relationship like that takes time, but it's necessary. It's the beginning of reconciliation. Together, the three of us have presented our research findings to community parents, the school board, staff at the school, and we're now getting ready to release our final report. Our research suggests that students at the school are learning more about Aboriginal cultures and developing positive sense of identity. What's interesting, though, is that another of the key themes we've heard from Aboriginal parents in this neighborhood is that they, too, want a real collaborative relationship with the school board. They want their kids to learn more about their cultures, and they think this could happen at the Aboriginal Focus School, but they're worried that the program will end up being segregated, of low quality, and they're unsure of how much the school board truly supports the school. This photo is from a rally organized by the school's Parent Advisory Committee this summer. You might have heard this week that the school board actually just voted to protect the Aboriginal Focus School from possible closure in the next 5 years, allowing it time to develop. That protection is the direct result of the activism of parents at the school. The school board's taken some good steps towards the real partnership that Aboriginal parents want, but our research also suggests some more ways that it can do that and go even further, working to create a relationship that's a real symbol of reconciliation. The question I want to end with is, what does reconciliation look like in practice? It's all well and good to talk about reconciliation, to declare a year of reconciliation, as we did in Vancouver, but the real work comes in the respectful relationships that we develop as we work together, Aboriginal and settler peoples. I find hope for reconciliation in this beautiful banner that was developed by children at the Aboriginal Focus School from many different nations. It says, "We are the Aboriginal Focus School, diverse and together." This is how we start to build an inclusive city that's truly respectful of diversity. This is where we can begin to see what reconciliation might look like in practice. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Stuart Points, a professor in the School of Communication at SFU, and he's going to present Digital Frictions, Learning, Dwelling, and Imagining in Media Cities.
Hello, thank you. And thank you, Joy. Thanks to the organizers and to my fellow presenters. The presentation I'm going to give is actually complementing what Eugene was talking about the connective tissues of cities and how certain forces in cities are often invisible to our view. I want to talk about a research project I've been leading over the last 4 years called the Youth Digital Media Ecologies Project. And really at the center of it is an idea of, oh, look at that, there we are. Really at the center of it is an idea about digital frictions in the world of young people that is organized, about 12 to 15,000 young people that I'm going to talk about. So, it's not an exaggeration to say that the digital is everywhere today. Digital media shape our cities, our learning communities, and the very substance and meaning of public life. It's in this light that the notion of digital frictions helps us to understand the mediated worlds that young people, and indeed all of us, now operate in. The notion of friction highlights feelings of disharmony that run through young lives. Learning, dwelling, and imagining among youth is now steeped in new kinds of connections and disruptions. And while this context can be unnerving, digital frictions helps us to diagnose emerging media practices that are part of the way young people are contributing to public space and urban democracy across cities like Vancouver. And not just Vancouver. In fact, part of what I came out of this project is that what I'm talking, the scenario I'm painting in Vancouver is happening in cities around the world. Digitally infused urban youth media scenes are part of a new set of practices producing compelling forms of friction in cities. In fact, around the world, the past decade has been witness to an outpouring of social change, enabled and knit together by digital media networks. This is most obvious in the Arab Spring and student protests in Chile, in Quebec, in Spain, in Israel, in Turkey, and so on. But it's also apparent among the diversity of community youth media groups that have expanded around the world in recent years, and Vancouver is no exception to this. In fact, almost a leader in this. Such groups are part of a response to the risk conditions that now shape young lives. They're crucial in negotiating citizenship in highly mediated cultures and are vital for addressing digital divides to equip young people with resources and networks necessary to respond to confusion, violence, and opportunity that now go hand in hand with ubiquitous digitization. The work such groups do is part of a tradition of community media, which we've heard something about today, and media education. And what I want to talk about is the Youth Digital Media Ecologies Project. This project has looked at Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal, and this world of nonprofit youth media groups that is really bursting up in each of these cities. I want to focus here on Vancouver. Oops, did I get to? There we go. This is actually not if you go to the website ydme.ca, you can see a whole captured picture of this project and the organizations that are part of it. Vancouver has a habit of looking out. Sorry, let me start that again. In the project, we investigate nonprofit youth media projects and how they're affecting public culture in Canada's 3 largest cities. I'll talk about Vancouver here. Vancouver has a habit of looking outward to its edges for public space, to the beaches, the seawalls, and parks that surround the city. But the absence of a city center hasn't undermined the emergence of a robust youth media scene in Vancouver. With more than 40 community youth media groups in the city of 2 million, youth media production is part of a new media ecology, and this is just a flavor of some of those groups, that's shaping productive forms of cultural friction in the city. I argue thus because the number and range of youth involved in these groups is really surprising. There's approximately, a conservative estimate, 12 to 15,000 young people annually who get touched by the city, by these organizations, which is about 20% of 15 to 24-year-olds in the city. Such groups also bring together an impressive diversity of youth. 86% of, oops, am I going back? I apologize. There we are. 86% of organizations work largely with low-income youth and young people of color, make up the majority of participants in most organizations. 52% of media groups do at least some work with LGBT youth. And 11% of groups produce media with young people who lack citizenship or permanent resident status, and so are often the most vulnerable populations in cities. Vancouver's youth media scene also addresses a range of objectives: media, education, film literacy, youth violence prevention, urban Aboriginal youth, and so on. More than the number and diversity of participants, the location of many groups. I apologize, there we are. More than the number and diversity of participants, the location of many groups, the networks operating among them, and the kind of media they produce underline a new and emerging role for organizations. If you go to the website, all of these red points, they actually burst out, and you see linked pages for all the organizations. So you get a real feel. But I wanted to give you this sense because most of them are concentrated, perhaps not surprisingly, in the downtown and east side of the city. That's important for lots of reasons. More than the number and diversity of participants, the location of many groups, the networks operating among them, and the kind of media they produce underline a new and emerging role. Canada's third largest city is often called a city of glass because glass-skinned office and residential towers. I apologize. I got lost in my sequence there. Canada's third largest city is often called a city of glass because glass-skinned office and residential towers dominate the city's core. This wasn't always the case, but recent developments and gentrification have broadly reshaped the city over the last 25 years. One consequence has been the out-migration of professionals and helping industry workers and other homeowners, as we all know in the city. But these organizations have concentrated in the city and in many ways continue to bring young people into the city who are otherwise being migrated out to suburbs. And in this way, they're actually providing a sense of belonging and a sense of home. In Vancouver, most media projects are concentrated in the downtown east side, but what they do is they bring together low-income youth, recently immigrated youth, and young populations who are otherwise marginalized. The consequence of this work is sometimes invisible, and yet this is a media ecology which is really rewriting the scripts of how urban scenes operate. We see evidence of such scripts in the remarkable diversity of work organizations. These are part of the networks. Where'd we go? This is the range of media that organizations produce, and it crosses a whole set of genres. There's a rich trove of work that comes about. These are the barriers. It won't surprise people that the barriers are fundamentally financial, that create precarious amongst these organizations. And yet these organizations are part of a new and important kind of cultural friction that's part of the connective tissue that makes young people part of cities and part of the democratic future of our spaces. Digital frictions help us to understand the mediated conditions under which young people live. Across much of the global north, there's long been a tendency to see non-school-based learning as supplements to formal schooling. But what our research shows is that this world is actually a rich trove, a new route for young people to become part of the spaces in the cities which they want to call home but often aren't welcomed into. These organizations are precarious, their funding is unstable, their size is often not large enough to keep them stable over long terms. And yet, the amount that they contribute to the city, the connective tissue that they build into our lives, provides a kind of richness that's often invisible to our view, and it provides a way that the world of culture is shifting and taking on new form in the city. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Stuart. It's interesting to see some of the themes that cross these stories. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Shauna Sylvester. And I actually hope I don't have to really introduce you. I hope everybody knows Shauna. And I'm just going to take a minute to really thank Shauna for being, the driving force and the inspiration behind SFU Public Square. She really has been led this whole initiative, the programming, with a great team. But I really just want to thank you. And I want to take this opportunity to particularly thank Shauna for her work.
Thank you. Thank you. It's
That's
really,
right.
There is a very big team. Now, I'm actually going to step away from my hat as SFU Public Square, and I'm actually going to put on a different hat, which is my other hat. I am the director of the Center for Dialogue, and the Center for Dialogue works in a number of ways with cities, particularly our Civic Engage program. But I'm going to talk about one. I'm going to tell you a story about renewable cities. Now, 5 years ago, when I was a fellow at the Center for Dialogue, I started an organization called Carbon Talks. And Carbon Talks worked with municipalities that are transitioning to a low-carbon economy. So these were municipalities that had already made a commitment, had set a target to get to a better place in dealing with climate change. But instead, they may not have had the buy-in that they needed. Now, what we did is we began then to work with those groups, those organizations, and really try and build out the buy-in. Work with their stakeholders, give them research, the best up-to-date applied research, and then convene them so that they could move from policy to implementation. Well, after 5 years, the whole issues of climate change, the impacts were getting worse and worse and worse, and we really wanted to scale up. At that point in March 2014, I was asked to facilitate in Europe the European Union hearings on 100% renewable energy. And I remember, I thought 100% renewable, that's a really big, ambitious goal, and I thought can't be done. Well, I went to Europe, and what I realized at that stage is not only can it be done, not only is it possible, but this is inevitable, the transition to 100% renewable. And that's where Renewable Cities was born. So Renewable Cities is really funded by two foundations, the North Growth Foundation and the Sitka Foundation with Ross Beatty. I came back, I worked with the staff of the Carbon Talks team, and we conducted over 150 interviews with cities, local governments, regional governments, private sector, utilities across the globe. And we started to look and say, well, what is it about renewable cities? What is it that is a renewable city? Well, one, we recognize that cities and city networks are the driving force in climate change. They're moving faster, more furiously than almost any other sector. We also realize that the whole debate on climate change is a very politicized debate. It's often seen as an environmental left debate. Unfortunate, but that is the case. And so what we started to do is we tested renewable cities. The whole renewable energy crosses all political spectrums. It's a term that is enabled in the conversation. It's not polarized in the same way. We also realized that if we're going to talk about renewable, we really have to get at energy efficiency. That's a big part of what we're doing. Renewable cities look specifically at electricity, heating and cooling, and transportation. And many cities will set corporate, they'll say that all of us, our city corporate operations will be 100% renewable. But it's that point in which they set it for the community as well that it makes the big difference. It also deals with other issues, but I'm not going to go into those. There are already cities that have said that they are going to be 100% renewable and have achieved it. Aspen, Burlington, and if anybody's from Iceland can help me with, or is that Linköping? Sweden, thank you so much. There are other cities that are setting the targets. Fukushima, Vancouver, Copenhagen, Munich, and Oxford County. Vancouver was the first in Canada to do so. Now what we did is, because we are a Center for Dialogue, we asked ourselves, what is our value added in this space? And made the decision that we were not going to recreate what was already going on. We were going to support what was already happening in the world. And what we did is we convened a global learning forum last May. 350 of the global leaders working in this space. And we said to them, the moment they start using the term renewable cities as if it's their own, we've succeeded, and they are doing that. Now, one of the exciting things about doing that work is that we also worked with the City of Vancouver in the lead up for them. And in March 2015, they actually proclaimed Vancouver would be 100% renewable, not just in heating and cooling and electricity, which is easier, but also in transportation. So we also do research-based dialogue, collaboration, thought leadership, and we work with a whole range of different groups, governments, city networks, partners. Right now, as you all know, well, maybe you don't know, but in December is the major climate talks in December in Paris. We're going to be leading and supporting the international network that is creating renewable cities. There is now a global network called Renewable Cities. I remember when I started and I asked a whole range of people in our research, what do you think about cities? They said it can't be done. Cities only control the demand. They don't control the supply. And now there's a whole movement called Renewable Cities. And what's so exciting is that movement started from this building. So I want to end by saying that I work with a great team. When I stepped into the role as the Center for Dialogue, I had to find somebody that could take on the leadership of this. And I recruited our ambassador, our High Commissioner to Australia, Michael Small, to come. And he has now taken over Carbon Talks and Renewable Cities, but he is working with one of the most amazing group of researchers. I wish they were here because I'd love for you to meet them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shauna. Thank you very much. Last but not least, Rebecca Zappelli is going to speak to us on the topic of collective impact in mental health and substance use.
Oh, I'm so short. This is very unfortunate that the lectern is as tall as myself. Thank you so much for lasting this long. I know typically I would be 3 old fashions in by now, so thank you. So I'm going to give you, oh gosh, how does this work? Do I press the top button? Right, thank you. We're sharing this journey together. So I'm here to talk about an effort that we're doing here in the city of Vancouver around really transforming the mental health and addiction sector, one collective impact project at a time. This is a model that's really come out of researching collaborative efforts, and it's come out of Tamarack Institute and an organisation called FSG that's come from over in Seattle, have done a lot of work around, okay, what are kind of inherently successful aspects of collective effort or collaborative effort, and in designing that and identifying what are the conditions for that, they've come up with what is the collective impact model. This had a lot of salience amongst the mental health and addiction sector, because everyone was really struggling with what do we do as a sector when we've got really kind of disparate forms and fragmentation, and how do we bring everything together, appreciating that we have, you know, quite a dysfunctional system, but with people with very genuine desires to do good, and people that desperately need kind of intervention and support. So this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about our systems level effort. I'm going to try and whiz through it. It's really hard to distill a really complex system that is 100 years old into 5 minutes. I'll do my best, and then we can get to the booze. So if we think about kind of complex system design, this is actually the subway system of Tokyo. It looks pretty complex to me. But if you were to kind of put something like this into the mental health and addiction sector and try and map that out, it would be a lot more complex. This is a really kind of linearly complex kind of system, and to get to one area, while it seems hard, eventually you could navigate your way because it is a linear system. If you are someone who is entering the mental health and addiction system at a point of crisis, you kind of enter the system and suddenly you're here somewhere floating around, and you want to get to kind of this end over here, which is the emergency department, or wherever it is that you need to have your interventions and your needs immediately met in a crisis situation. But what happens to you is you kind of end up all over the place, and you're not really directed. Sometimes you get the help you need when you need it, and other times you don't, and there's a lot of inconsistencies with that story and a lot of human narratives that can speak to that experience. So it kind of just keeps going on. And this is what it feels like for a lot of people in the system, and it also feels a lot like that for the service providers, people that genuinely want to make difference in people's lives. Systems will function as they are designed, and so the mental health and addiction system itself encompasses everything from justice and corrections to law enforcement to healthcare to community development, welfare, housing, all of these different systems that were never designed naturally to be together, and suddenly we're expecting them to do that, and that's a really, really difficult thing. So this is kind of what ends up happening, is that there's this kind of loop and this catch-22 that happens as you're navigating yourself through the system as a provider, and also as you're navigating it through as a consumer or person with a lived experience. This is kind of how, like, ideally, to distill it in a very simple visual, what we'd love our system to be doing. Everyone working together, everyone understanding their relationship to each other. And that ultimately the end game is we have happy humans. We have people that are supported to stay well, people that are supported to recover and to live a kind of good life in however they identify that. That's our end game here. And so, but this is kind of what's happening. We're all just plugging holes and desperately trying to make good out of this situation, but kind of we're just shoving the chocolate. What I want to leave you with here is that we have a really, really rich tapestry in terms of the mental health and addiction sector, and some of you may be involved in that sector in various ways, and some of you may be involved and you just don't know it. Well, welcome. It's a vibrant sector. I love this image because what it represents to me is everything that we're hoping for with the collective impact effort. And what we've learned through this process and what's happened, and I haven't described that the best, but that's why you should come and chat to us afterwards. But what I'm trying to describe here is to represent that we all have there is a human narrative to the mental health and addiction sector and the experience, and some of you have touched on that actually today with some of the presentations around the markets and a load of other work that's happened. But there's also a systems narrative, and then there's a human narrative and a human experience. And how do we tie those things together to better understand the system and how it functions, but also better understand how we design for impact so that that system is functioning better for the people that it needs to do so for. And this is a part of the challenge that we're facing at the moment, using a model like collective impact, which uses traditional collaborative approaches where you've got everyone in the same room and everyone's talking together and talking about what they wish for the system and what they want and designing a shared vision together. And someone talked about that earlier. A part of this process is prototyping a new way of looking at system design, and then from there looking at what do we have in the system that tells us the narrative, tells us the system narrative, tells us the human narrative in data, and then how do we translate that so that we can design better systems, so that we can map out what's happening in our system, where are things going wrong, where can we better design that aspect of the system so that we can kind of course correct as we go. And so that is our story.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a terrific way to wrap up our storytelling. We've had 13 stories, 15 storytellers, and one great evening so far. I've been thinking about stories as we've been going on this evening, and what do we want out of our stories? We want them to teach us something. We've accomplished that. We want them to leave us wanting more. We've accomplished that. They've been intriguing. They've drawn us in. We've had really, really wonderful storytellers. So first, please join me in thanking all of our great storytellers. It's also so wonderful to see research presented in this way, to see people's work really being mobilized and shared, and to also see the way in which research is helping us build better cities. So that's very gratifying as well. This is the first evening, and there is more to come. So I really encourage you to grab a program and to learn about all of the events that are going to be happening in the We the City Community Summit. We have events happening across our 3 campuses, Vancouver, Burnaby, and Surrey, and I encourage you to come to as many as you possibly can. There is a special signature event I want to particularly highlight. It's happening on November 4th. It's called We the City, an evening at the center. It's being presented in partnership with Vancity, and we're going to be featuring compelling conversations from international artists, including Candy Chang, Teju Cole, and Buffy St. Marie. I think it's going to be a fabulous night, and I encourage you to join us. So we do have more conversation that I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to following up with all of you in terms of the great work that you've presented this evening, and I encourage you to stick around and to talk to our great presenters. But before we close the official part of the evening, I'm going to pass the microphone back to Laurie to close the evening. So Laurie.
Thank you, Joy. Well, several things just to close very quickly. A few thank yous, and then please join us at the bar. First of all, I want to thank our Vice President of Research who's come along to moderate this evening. Joy, please join us in thanking Joy for the good work. Secondly, this is, as Joy said, this is the launch of our SFU Community Summit Week, We the City. We're looking at research tonight, but as we've intimated all week long, we're going to be talking about the city. I want to take this opportunity to call out and thank the people in SFU Public Square, Shauna, whom you met tonight, Janet Weber over there, who does all the heavy lifting behind the scenes. And could I have all the SFU Public Square folks and the volunteers raise their hands so we can be identified? Please join me in thanking all of them. Finally, it's been done already by Joy, but again, we want to say on behalf of the university, for those of you who have taken the time to build a presentation, to come along here tonight and share it with us, we are so grateful you would take the time and put it into this and come along on a Friday evening to share with us. So again, to our research storytellers one more time, please give them a big round of applause. The evening most appropriately ends with research and storytelling over by the bar, so please come and join us.